and welcome to the Disability Connection. I am your host, Caitlin Walsh, DLC's Administrative Assistant. The Disability Connection is produced by the Disability Law Center. The Disability Law Center is the protection and advocacy agency for Massachusetts. We are part of a national network of disability rights agencies investigating abuse and neglect and providing legal representation and other advocacy services to people with disabilities. DLC's website is www.dlc-ma.org. Welcome to the next episode of our mini-series, The Life of a Self-Advocate. Today, I am joined by Laura Best, one of DLC's intake specialists. She is going to discuss the duality of both being a sibling and a peer and how she integrates that into the intake process. A content note for our listeners, Laura describes her family's experiences with medical trauma. Welcome, Laura. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do for DLC?
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today. I've been an intake specialist at DLC for 4 years. Obviously, we wear many hats at intake, you know, conducting the intake appointment with potential clients, engaging in outreach with the disability community. And prior to being an intake specialist, I was the confidential administrative assistant, a precursor to Caitlin's role at DLC. And most importantly to today's conversation, as Caitlin mentioned earlier, I'm a peer with mental health experiences, and I am a sibling to a brother with an acquired brain injury.
Thanks, Laura. Can you share more about becoming a sibling of someone with a disability?
Yeah, definitely. So we're going to go back in time quite a few years ago to me being 6 years old. My brother was a toddler and he developed encephalitis and acute disseminated encephalomyelitis, or ADEM. The symptoms did go untreated for quite a few months, which resulted in a seizure on Thanksgiving 2003. Suddenly, doctors began to understand that he had encephalitis and believed that this was the cause for what they were considering to be a single seizure. Unfortunately, it wasn't really until later on that doctors determined that he had an acquired brain injury, which has led to my brother's lifelong battle with medication resistant epilepsy and symptoms related to the ABI.
Oh, wow. That must have been very difficult for your brother, your family. I'm glad he finally got a diagnosis. Sometimes that just takes too long. So, how did your family navigate your brother's ABI?
Yeah, diagnostic processes are never easy. It took about 5 years, so quite a bit of time.
Oh, wow. That's for a kid, 5 years?
Yeah, there was a lot going on. There was a lot going on. Witnessing it as a child, it was eye-opening as well as obviously traumatizing. I grew up in a post ADA universe, but accommodations for my brother weren't guaranteed. I know you've mentioned this before. I personally will never forget, hearing my parents discuss my brother's second grade teacher who didn't want to learn seizure protocol because it was too difficult. She also gave Jack a detention for missing homework assignments during an 18-day hospitalization.
Wow. Sorry.
Yeah, just total failure of the system there. But nobody really told us that. The body knows that it's wrong, but we didn't have the words yet. And finding that really specific kind of information on accommodations typically takes an attorney or really experienced sped advocate. And that just wasn't something available to us. So, me being me, um, I wanted to figure out what happened, what we can do, if it was wrong, which in parentheses, yes,
Yes.
it
Yes.
that not right. Um, and I wanted to figure it out. I'm a very stubborn person. If the adults in the room weren't going to figure it out, I would. And so thus my journey into disability rights begins.
Thanks, Laura, for sharing. And you're right. In a previous episode, I shared my own experience at school. It was a minor issue compared to what your brother experienced. So, but even then, I know schools can really fail kids who clearly need the accommodations, but there's a breakdown in communication, some point, sometimes at the very start, and there's nothing in place, leaving it up to your family and others to become experts, advocates on the fly. For
Yeah.
myself, I had a teacher in middle school who didn't fully understand the accommodation I needed, but my mom was right there and she was able to jump in and help advocate for me. So, um, but you had also mentioned at the start, introducing yourself, that you are a peer with lived mental
Yeah.
health experiences. So,
Mhm.
so for yourself, what was like the process of that?
Yeah. So, what I didn't understand then, which I have a much better understanding of now, is my own mental health was, declining when all of this was happening
Oh
with
yeah,
my
that's
brother,
totally
which,
understandable.
yeah, it makes sense. And I think, you know, maybe I was sort of blocking those symptoms as a kid, maybe not. My parents have always told me I had nervous habits and space out moments where I just sort of like look off into space, um, not really fully aware of my surroundings. And that kind of made a lot of sense when I was finally diagnosed with complex PTSD in my 20s. Finally, then, which is why I said I have a different perspective now than I did then. But I understood those habits as mechanisms for managing my anxiety and the environment around me and the trauma and sort of the gaslighting. Like, there was just a lot happening. And so I was constantly worried, but I didn't have the words to express why.
Yeah, that makes
Seizures,
sense.
yeah. So seizures and brain injuries, that's not in the vernacular of a kid. It's hardly in the vernacular of an adult. Um, so that's my long answer into the diagnostic process. It was not straightforward. Not every provider is going to use the same approach to treat. Not every doctor is really willing to acknowledge complex PTSD as a diagnosis. So, finding validating and empathetic mental health care was my pipeline into recovery. When my providers agreed that what happened to my family and my brother was medical trauma, I was like, oh, okay, I can do this. Like, this is something that I can I can talk about. I don't have to explain this anymore. And of course, working at DLC really helped me integrate those experiences because, I started at DLC right after I graduated college. So a lot of this was happening in the background, which has made me become a better self advocate.
For sure, definitely. And knowing you and working with you for 4 years, I can totally see it. Um, and just an observation from my end, it sounds like both you and your brother spent years navigating the diagnostic process, and it never really fully clicked for either of you until, doctors finally listened. And so I'm glad that, you know, things worked out. I'm sorry it took years. But how do you find your own recovery or experiences that, impacting your role at DLC?
Yeah, it having my background definitely puts me in a unique position as an intake specialist. I know we've talked about this, and I am one of the first ones to admit there are days where it's really hard to separate the legal issue that DLC is looking into away from the human one, especially when I speak to siblings who have brain injury experience in their families. I definitely consider myself an empath, which can make the job a little bit hard. But one of the most important parts of the intake is holding space. I'm not here to judge people. That is quite literally not my job. Nobody is calling an attorney when things are going well for them. And if an individual is experiencing, something really upsetting and they're expressing, some negatively valenced emotion like anger or sadness or frustration, that's fine.
Oh, yeah,
I'm going to support you. You don't need to apologize to me. Nobody calls DLC on the best day of their life. A lot of times when people are calling us, it could be the worst day of their life. And discussing that is uncomfortable. So if I can accommodate the individual and know that they're being heard, not judged, I feel like I've done my job.
definitely. And from my limited role as admin assistant, I can tell one of intake's most important roles is giving people space and letting them feel heard. I suspect a lot of people are calling at DLC at the point of they've explained their issue so many times to so many different organizations, so many different people, where they feel like they only have such a short time to get everything out. And then, no, intake is going to sit with them however long it takes to get all
Mhm.
the information out and make sure people feel heard. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, just quickly on that, I think there's nothing more frustrating to hear someone be stuck in a referral loop. I've called this organization and they told me to call Y organization and Y told me to call X organization. It it becomes a wild goose chase. That's not setting someone up for success. They're already dealing with, frankly, a lot of times trauma. Why re traumatize? That's not the point.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm really agreeing there. You're obviously very passionate about your job and the intake process.
Yes, yes, I am.
So, how do you feel like working as an intake specialist in your role? can relate to self-advocacy?
Yeah, one person might argue there's potentially overlap. I think they're one and the same. Sure, intake can be perceived as DLC's front door. I think we do a lot more than that. We have, as a team, so many referrals and so many resources and information that potential clients can look at that can help them navigate processes in all different kinds of circumstances: immigration, special ed, eviction, terminations from employment. These are things that DLC doesn't always have capacity to assist with and can't take on in some cases, but I can point people in the right direction. And so suddenly, you know, DLC typically gets 30 to 50 clients a day. So if we're referring 30 people or 20 people, 20 people have 4 or 5 resources that were provided to set them up for success. We can't guarantee success or representation when we provide a referral, but we point people in the right direction. And that creates a self advocate. Suddenly, those 20 people, they're having a coffee with a friend and their friend is experiencing a similar legal issue. Oh, well, I contacted DLC and they told me to contact legal services or my independent living center, and they can help with that. That's amazing. And this, like, quadruples when you do an outreach and you're talking to 30 people in a room. You're creating a system of self advocacy because those 30, 40, 50 people who, are consumers, really active consumers, professionals, social workers, suddenly have tons of information at the end of an hour, 2 hours, a half day, however long you're doing that outreach, and can pass that along into their micro community. So, intake in a lot of ways is self advocacy, if that makes sense.
It does. Mhm.
I'm glad.
I think from my experience as an admin, pulling supplies together and sometimes even helping on trainings and outreaches, I can see it firsthand where all of this information gets translated and easily understandable chunks and folks in the community get it at the end of the day. And I can see how important being out in the community can be. And I know
Yeah.
I'm part of a peer mental health group. My friends know that I work at DLC and have come to me with questions that I don't know the answers to, but
Mhm.
I know if I give them DLC's information and resources and guide them to contacting DLC, reaching out to intake, that helps.
Mhm.
Speaking of intake, how should folks get in touch if they need help or have questions?
Yeah. Our intake hours are Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. That is when we accept voicemails. You can complete an online request for assistance form as well. You can reach DLC's online request for assistance form at www.dlc-ma.org/ask-for-help/. Me or a member of my team will respond to the request for assistance within 1 to 2 business days. I will say that if you do not have internet access, please leave us a voicemail and let us know that you don't have access or the internet is not accessible to you, and we will contact you by phone, even if it happens to be off hours. We consider that an accommodation for communication.
Great. Thanks. That's really helpful to know. And our website has the request form link right at the top of our website, so it is easy to find. Um, I know we're wrapping up, but one last question.
Yeah.
Um, I know you've described how you're connected to the disability community in a few different ways.
Mm-hmm.
How do you define that community?
Oh, the most important question and the hardest one. Um, so the disability community is diverse, and each one of us has a really unique experience that should be heard and valued. I think one of the most special things about the disability community is belonging and folks being their true selves without any masks on. That is really special and that is really validating. I think sometimes to have a disability is to feel isolated in some situations.
Definitely. I remember feeling like that as a kid.
Yeah. And I know my brother occasionally has expressed that to me. It you you're not alone, as stereotypical or Hallmark cardy as that sounds. You're you're not alone in this. There are people here for you and you belong. I know you described it in a previous episode as not being a monolith, and that rings true. It's not a monolith. The space that people with disabilities hold is valuable, and our experiences should be treated as valuable. And our community is very much defined by our founders and trailblazers like Alice Wong and Judy Heumann. It's their self advocacy. They're like the OG self advocates that created this space
Hmm.
and the ability to become strong advocates.
Definitely. Thanks, Laura. Um, I really enjoyed both Alice's and Judy's memoirs, and for Judy's book, which is called Being Human, but spelt like her last name, Heumann. There's so much history in there from the disability movement, and it was definitely a great way to learn about our community's work.
Mm-hmm.
Judy was there at the 504 protest, the sit-in, to
Yeah,
get reasonable accommodations, accessing services.
yeah.
Um, and then,
That's sorry.
go
One
ahead.
of my favorite memoirs is Being Human. She is a special, wonderful individual and sorely, sorely missed. But I know you want to also shout out Alice as well.
Yeah, like one of the first things I did when I felt connected to the disability community is I participated in online spaces, and I
Hmm.
I really only knew about Alice's work from social media.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, she wrote her own memoir called Year of the Tiger, and
Oh, okay.
it was great to learn about how her, childhood and upbringing kind of made Alice the advocate, the self-advocate, and the leader in the community that she was. But Unfortunately, we've come to the end of our podcast for today. That's the end of our time. Laura, I want to thank you so much for sharing your own story and your family's story. I
Well,
really
thank
appreciate your time.
you. Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate the space today.
Thanks. Awesome. This show, The Disability Connection, will be available on our website and as a podcast. Please follow us on social media. Go to our website at www.dlc-ma.org for the links.